Thanks.
Good to go.
Yes.
Congressman, whenever you're ready to begin, just let me know and I'll go ahead and hit record.
Hi, Vice Speaker. How are you?
Fine, thank you, Congressman. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for making time for us. I know it's not easy. Let's go ahead and begin. Tricia will go ahead and begin recording.
Give me a second, please.
Recording in progress.
Hafade, and thank you to our leaders of Legislatura. This is going to be a congressional update that we've scheduled, and I appreciate the legislature's accommodations with their busy schedule as well. I know that not only are you folks managing a session, but there's always a day-to-day demand of your respective offices, and so we highly value your presence and the opportunity to be able to provide you with some updated information. This is going to be the sixth in the past year, the sixth different briefing that we provided for you folks. We provided briefings from Exim Bank, the State Small Business Credit Initiative, the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board, the Army Corps of Engineers, and we even had a live in-person briefing on security matters from the Joint Region Marianas. Our office is incredibly privileged to be able to coordinate these informational sessions for you, and even more privileged to have your participation. So thank you so much for making the time. Present from my office and on island is my DC policy team, which will be doing the briefing on two items that we have before you. Both of them are somewhat interrelated. The first item is our bill that would require the governor of Guam to establish a database for verifying Chamorro ancestry and for other purposes. Those other purposes in particular are to make that database eligible for Section 8A consideration under small business, the Small Business Development and Small Business Administration. And before I get into too much detail, I'll go ahead and have my policy team get into that. The second item is going to be the the official report that we have from the Congressional Research Service on the history, the standing laws, and the way forward for Guam to consider a constitution, establishing, drafting, and adopting a constitution for the territory. We've had requests over the years for certain considerations for Organic Act amendments. The Organic Act has been amended a number of times to try and, in small ways, tweak the governance of our island within the framework of that particular document. However, the ability for us to draft a constitution and the information that we have available that outlines how that process works, I think is going to be something very much worth considering by Legislatura. Before we go on to the staff to provide the briefing, can we make sure that the documents are provided to all participants on this Zoom as an attachment? I would like to make sure they have a copy of the bill that we're going to be discussing, and make sure that they have a copy of the official Congressional Research Service report that we're going to be referencing. If we can just get confirmation from the staff that that's been transmitted.
Good day, everyone. I am uploading now the official memo from the Congressional Research Service regarding the adoption and ratification of a Guam Constitution.
And I believe the bill was already forwarded to all senatorial offices as well, but let's make sure that over the course of the conversation, staff, we upload that. And there it is, HR 6504. So all participants should have a copy of both items. Media partners are more than welcome to reference both as well for whatever work that they're going to be doing in the context of the conversation. With that, let me go ahead and yield to our Legislative Director, Tenel Tamori, to go ahead and begin the initial briefing on HR 6504.
Thank you, Congressman San Nicolas, honorable senators. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you today on our latest equity efforts for the people of Guam. Small Business Administration's a business development program aims to serve disadvantaged small businesses by setting aside at least 5% of all federal contracting dollars to locally owned disadvantaged businesses each year. The funding set aside for the 8A Business Development Program takes form through several federal programs, from loan assistance to free trainings under SBA's 7J Management and Technical Assistance Program. With the introduction of H.R. 6504, the Native Pacific Islanders of America Equity Act, introduced by Congressman San Nicolas and co-sponsored by Congressman Sablan of the CNMI, it prospectively adds the Native populations of Guam and the Northern Mariana Islands to the 8A Business Development Program. In addition to promoting equitable access across our Native communities, the inclusion of these Native populations would go a long way in providing aid to the local and family-owned businesses whose struggles have been further exacerbated by the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic over these past 2 years. The 8A Business Development Program would not only offer relief to our islands, but also provide avenues for the assistance and expertise of the Small Business Administration. Certified firms in the 8A program can efficiently compete and receive set-aside and sole source contracts, receive one-on-one business development assistance for their 9-year term from dedicated business opportunity specialists focused on helping firms grow and accomplish their business objectives, pursue opportunity for mentorship from experienced and technically capable firms through the SBA Mentor Protege Program, connect with procurement and compliance experts who understand regulations in the context of business growth, finance, and government contracting, pursue joint ventures with established businesses to increase capacity, qualify to receive federal surplus property on a priority basis, and receive free training from SBA's 7J Management and Technical Assistance Programs. So those are just in a nutshell some of the certified firm eligibilities as well as benefits. Expanding the Guam 8A eligibility specifically for recognized Native Chamorro firms will help new and existing businesses compete for federal contracts that otherwise may have been awarded to firms with their own non-Chamorro Native preferences. This will provide access for our people for Native consideration in federal contracts, helping them become more competitive for billions of dollars in 8A contracting opportunities, and direct more money into supporting Native programs on Guam. The time has come for us to embrace federal opportunities for the Chamorro people, especially when such opportunities have been afforded to other Indigenous people in America for decades. Thank you, Congressman, for the opportunity, and thank you, honorable senators, and we look forward to answering any of your questions that you may have. Thank you, Senator and Congressman. I yield back.
So before we get into questions, because I'm sure some of our senators will have some, I just want to quickly reference the establishment of how we recognize the Native Chamorro ancestry is consistent with how we already are doing it in Guam law. We're just going to codify into the Organic Act that the federal government will then be officially recognizing that same process. The adjudication for the management of this registry is also kept entirely local, with the public auditor, our local public auditor, being the one to audit to the registry itself, and our superior court, not the district court, but our superior court being the court of jurisdiction to adjudicate any complaints or concerns that may arise as a result of the registry process. So with that, I'll go ahead and pause and open the floor to any of our senators who may have any questions. Ultimately, with the introduction of this bill, we are looking to have Legislatura officially support the legislation so that we can have that on the record before the hearing, which is likely going to be in mid-February. And that way we can clearly illustrate to the various members of Congress that the local government is in fact supporting moving in this direction. So I'll go ahead and pause now for any senators who may have any questions. If none, that's really great news. We can go ahead now and move on to the discussion on the Guam Constitution research and findings that we have. I hope that the few minutes that we've afforded during the course of this discussion has allowed you to kind of peruse through it. As you can see, it's not voluminous, which was heartening for us, because it basically means that there isn't too much that needs to happen federally in order for us to be able to avail of this locally. In fact, the research has an outline on the background, the public law that initiated the process for the first time in 1977, and what has to happen next if that process was to be re-engaged. At this time, I'll go ahead and pause to allow for our legislative assistant, Mr. Matthew Style, who is on Guam for the first time, and he said he got sunburned. I was hoping to have a visual of that, but I guess it wasn't as bad as he was advertising. But let me go ahead and pause now and allow for Matthew to give us a quick brief on this research report from CRS.
Good day, everyone. Thank you so much, Congressman, for giving me this time. Thank you so much to the senators for listening. So as laid out in this process, the process for the Guam Constitution is relatively simple. It's authorized by U.S. Public Law 94-584, and then the Guam Public Law is 13202. For Public Law 13202, the CRS report, as you will see, says that it will need to be updated for the new report. A constitutional convention will need to be called on Guam. Once the Constitution is drafted and transmitted, it will go to the White House. The White House will then have 60 days for comments to be given, and then it is then transmitted to the Congress. Congress then will also have 60 days to either bring comments, edits, or outright, by joint resolution, reject. If you go back to the last time this was brought forth in the 1970s, it was sent from President Carter's office to the House Committee on Energy and Natural Resources, who held a hearing. The hearing then processed and went through. The Constitution then was presented to the people of Guam and was rejected in referendum. In order for us to then go back and to do this again, Public Law 13202 would need to be updated with new dates as laid out in the memorandum. You would then establish new dates for a constitutional convention, set out the qualifications of those who would become delegates, voter registration requirements, and from there you may draft your constitutional convention and then transmit it. We don't expect too many issues so far. If you go back and we have the copy of comments from President Carter as well as a transcript of the hearing from the 1970s, both of which can be transmitted upon request. There were no serious issues, both of which will be taken into account on this round. I hope that's a good enough explanation, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you so much, Matt. I think that one of the main points that I want to emphasize first off is there's nothing that we need to do federally in order for this process to re-engage. The existing federal law is still in force, and it is still in good order for the process to be reinitiated by the local government. The second thing that is very heartening is the clarity in the report that should we move forward a constitution for consideration, it's not contingent upon action federally. The constitution that we pass will, of course, go to the president and go before the House for them to review. But if they don't act, what we pass becomes the actual constitution. So while, of course, the federal government is going to have a process in reviewing the constitution that we're proposing, it's not subject to approval. It is by default going to be approved unless they take a certain action otherwise. As Matthew mentioned in the prior process in 1977, all of these steps were taken. The Constitution was drafted. It was put to the federal government. The president did have some comments. The House did have a hearing, but nothing changed between the time we passed our Constitution to the time the federal government actually went through it and reviewed it. And quite frankly, these 60-day timelines, absent any kind of glaring item that would be a massive red flag, those 60-day compressed timelines, just on a realistic basis in the Congress, would help to move this along very fluidly, absent any major red flags. Interestingly, on a historical basis, although there was no changes, the final constitution that we ratified in 1977 for consideration, when it came back for an actual referendum for adoption, our own language, unchanged, failed. And so since that time, we have not undertaken the process at all. I know that there were certain self-determination concerns that were raised and have had an opportunity to take their course. Today, we come to a situation where we again are having certain governance concerns, particularly between various branches of government. I know I've been in communication with a number of you regarding some of those concerns. A constitution would be a way for us to not only remedy what those concerns may be, but to also create a local mechanism for remedying any future governance concerns, rather than us having to have an organic act conversation that, as I've shared with some of you off in our direct channels, may actually be more prohibitive, especially on time-sensitive issues. So with that, I would like to go ahead and pause and make the opportunity available for any senators who may have any questions or comments regarding this new information that we provided.
We do have a question from Ms. Maureen Maratita. Did you still have a question, ma'am?
Tricia, let's pause first on the media partners, respectfully, Maureen, until I'm sure we've exhausted any potential questions from our lawmakers.
I understand, sir. I just have to leave at 2:30 but please, I defer to the senators.
I believe Vice Speaker Barnes has raised her hand.
Yes, thank you very much, Congressman. I think my first question would be, based on this process moving forward, would this jeopardize the self-determination process? And how would this impact the current discussions with the United Nations?
Thank you for the question. To my knowledge, there shouldn't be any interruption whatsoever. Puerto Rico adopted a constitution decades ago, and they are actually far more along the process of having a self-determination resolution for their particular district versus ours. So constitutional adoption, provided, of course, that there's no language in there that would create any kind of self-determination restriction, would not in any way create any kind of restrictive environments as we continue to address the self-determination question. So given the circumstances in progress of Puerto Rico, I wouldn't see that being an issue on our end. It has never once, and on the record for me to confirm, it has never once been referred to the fact that because Puerto Rico has a constitution, they should not move forward with considering their self-determination. It has never been used as a progressive roadblock on that process. So I do not see this being a problem in that respect.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Chris Dueñas had a question.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Congressman, for convening this meeting. On this issue of the Constitution and the proposal to re-energize this effort, if we were to pass the Constitution and following the processes, is it your view then that that Constitution that is passed, would it replace the Organic Act, or would it work in tandem with the Organic Act?
That's a good question. I think depending on how you structure the Constitution would ultimately determine how that final document, once enacted into law, would apply. If you drafted a Constitution as an addendum to the Organic Act, I don't think that would necessarily be problematic in terms of the federal consideration. So it is possible to, I guess, draft a Constitution that would coexist with the Organic Act, provided that there's no conflict. But I would proffer that adopting a Constitution would be a replacement process to the Organic Act. Though you are more than welcome to codify line by line whatever provisions in the Organic Act you wish to keep, if any in part or in whole.
So from the congressional side, if we went through that process, I didn't follow closely enough or research closely enough the last effort, but if, say, for example, Congress is it a congressional, is something that would be ratified by Congress then?
Congress will be afforded a timeline to be able to take certain actions. If they don't act, the Constitution automatically is beyond the reach of the Congress and within the local government to finalize and ratify. So there is a window for congressional action to either change language or outrightly reject the document. But once that window lapses, there is no congressional role. And so the final document does not need formal ratification. It just needs to pass that particular timeline without any rejection or without any changes. If there are any changes within that timeline, then those final changes would be included as the final document for consideration remitted back to the local government, at which time they can decide whether to even move it forward at all or to let it die where it's at because they're somehow dissatisfied with whatever may have been appended. But notwithstanding that, the local government at that point will be able to move forward with, again, a ratification process like a referendum for the final enactment and replacement of the Organic Act with the Constitution.
Okay, I do have just a couple of follow-up questions. I think I will, respect Maureen if that's the will of your office to just allow, her to ask a media question. But I have a couple more questions, but I'll stand by.
If there are no objections from any of the senators present, I know I did see Speaker Terlahi raise her hand, Senator San Augustine and Senator Moylan. Ms. Maureen does have a 7-minute window. Would there be any objection to us going and allow her to jump on with a question? Maureen, you have the blessing of legislatura.
I appreciate that very much. I just have one question, Congressman, and good afternoon, everybody. Do you have any feedback on the position of the Hawaii delegation, given the number of Native Hawaiian and Alaskan companies that would be affected in that their companies are already AA companies, and they've kind of had the construction industry. They benefited enormously. So do you have any feedback from Hawaii on this?
We are in communication with the Hawaii delegation, and this is why I'm actually needing the support. I always need the support, but this is why it's even more critical for the bill. As you mentioned, Maureen, there would be certain interests that may cause pause when it comes to support from other member districts that do have existing access to this kind of 8A consideration. And so we're going to continue to work the angles with those particular members. But notwithstanding that, we are going to continue to move the entire measure forward with the fundamental argument being, this type of consideration is created for Native peoples as a means of affording them the opportunities that they should be within this country. And as opposed to having Native peoples in conflict with one another over who should avail of this, we should be making as many opportunities available for Native peoples throughout the country. And that should include the Native people of Guam. So we will see what happens with any kind of potential objections in the forward progress of this bill. But I have communicated this measure to leadership. We do have, in fact, the CNMI and my colleague and dean of my delegation, Congressman Sablan, upon introduction of our bill, actually came to us and worked with us to include the CNMI now also in how this legislation would apply. He is the chairman of the subcommittee that's going to be having the hearing on this in mid-February, and he's also a senior ranking member on the Natural Resources Committee as a whole. So we're looking at getting this through on the committee side, trying to build up as much bipartisan support for it as possible, and hopefully, we're not going to, try and get into any kind of confrontations with any of our other Native representing members of Congress. So we're going to navigate that as deftly as we can. But right now we're at a place where we can look at moving it forward, and we wanted to make sure legislatura was fully appraised and as involved as they're willing to be.
Okay, thank you. That's the only question I have, and I appreciate your and everybody's consideration. Thank you very much, Senators.
That's a very good question, by the way, Maureen. Let me go ahead and return back to our members in the legislature. By rank, of course, Speaker Terlahi will go ahead and yield to you.
Appreciate that, Congressman, and thank you for the briefing. I have a couple questions. First of all, on the bill, does that have a number? It's already been introduced, you're saying?
Yes, it's been introduced. It is HR 6504. You may want, if you aren't able to pull it up online, you may want to give it a day or two. The House sometimes has a lag time from introduction and assignment of bill number to actual website posting, but it does have an official bill number, HR 6504.
All right. And was it just introduced today?
It was introduced earlier in the week,
Okay.
but not today.
All right. And so back to the other matter, the Constitution for Guam, I guess I wanted to ask you a couple of things. One is, of course, they did prepare a constitution for Guam before, but it failed in the vote here on Guam. And as you described, it was because of self-determination concerns, right? And I know you've stated right now today that you believe that those concerns should not be a concern, but I'm wondering, it's not really analyzed in this document, what really the impact would be. And my concern is that, as the Vice Speaker stated, when we go to the United Nations, the United States representative to the United Nations, or the State Department, their position is that Guam is already self-governing, or, I'm paraphrasing, but they use words like that. And I wanted to know the impact of this constitution on the State Department's position, if there's any, because the only way we're going to get, over those concerns is to have that part of it analyzed. And I'm glad that they did an analysis of the local law. I've never really seen the GAO or the Congressional Research Service do an analysis of our local law, but that's helpful. That it's simple to update that. But yeah, it's that matter. And then of course our Commonwealth was rejected based on 3 issues, if I remember correctly. One of them was immigration. One of them was self-determination again. And I think it was mutual consent, the third one. But I just wanted to know if it's if this Congressional Research Service could determine for us, if we would be able to establish those issues in our Constitution, or what really does this mean when it's on page 2 of the Congressional Research document? It says, address that our Constitution must address the subject matter of the Organic Act of 1950's provisions related to local self-government. Yeah, I guess I'm wondering if you have any analysis of that, and then how these issues work together, because I'd like to see us, get as close to that Commonwealth draft as we did before, because that was ratified by the people of Guam. We were able to get, the vote on it, but those issues were held up in Congress. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
So on the first item, with respect to the State Department's position that Guam is already self-governing, that's already their position now. That's the position now with the Organic Act. And so that position is not going to be further compromised by the adoption of a constitution, because they're already holding that position under the status quo. So adopting a constitution wouldn't further add to the argument, because they already believe the argument is meritorious under its current set of circumstances. And again, with the existence of a constitution in Puerto Rico, and the Puerto Rican position being very plainly held by Puerto Rico, and also similarly held by members of Congress, that they have not remedied their self-determination situation. I do not see the Constitution creating a further roadblock than what we are already dealing with. I see it as a means for us to, take one more small step forward. Absolutely not the final step, but definitely one very small step forward towards us being able to craft what we want to craft in terms of our governing document, and also in so doing, crafting a means for us to amend that and address whatever governance concerns comes up as a result of that, without necessarily having to, amend it the way we amend the Organic Act. So that's how I would view it from the State Department concern. I just don't see it adding a roadblock, because I believe that the roadblock is already present and firm, at least as far as that perspective. On the second question about local self-government and that reference on page 2, I believe that what CRS is referring to is merely the provisions related to local self-government in terms of the creation of 3 branches of government and a democratic system. We must have a governor, we must have a legislature, we must have a judiciary. That's what the provisions related to local self-government are in the Organic Act. There is nothing in the Organic Act that actually speaks towards anything self-government related beyond how we're supposed to structure our self-government. And so in the Constitution, as we consider adopting one, and if we were to move forward in doing so, we of course would need to have the provisions in there on how we would self-govern locally. And naturally, we should have an executive, we should have a legislative, and we should have a judicial. If we don't, I think that'll be the biggest red flag that will jump out and have everybody up in arms. So that's, I think, that language is speaking to. And then with respect to the details in the Commonwealth draft, I would proffer that we should look at the opportunity for a constitution as a means for us to be able to create different kind of channels to address areas that ultimately resulted in the inability for Commonwealth to be adopted here on this island. If there were certain provisions there that ultimately killed the whole thing, let's quarantine, for lack of a better word, quarantine those provisions and evaluate them, and whether or not we can move forward a constitution with or without addressing them. If we can without addressing them, we should also have some discussions on how we can eventually address them. Whether or not it would be through some kind of future constitutional amendment, whether or not we can create a process in the Constitution for those kind of things to be reviewed and negotiated at a future date or on a regular basis with the federal government. I think that those might be ways for us to kind of figure out how to work around or work through those things. But as far as, again, trying to make a process that ultimately results in us taking advantage of what this entails, the fewer red flags we can put into, the better it would be for us as we consider moving it forward. I hope I answered the questions.
Yes, I appreciate that. I feel, of course, we can make a constitution that tells, that dictates certain things like how soon tax refunds will be paid, things like this that other states have dictated that we, want to control. However, I just am afraid we're not going to get over this barrier of, unless we have an analysis of it, which I'm hoping we can still get, right? An analysis of the impacts of this on the concerns that defeated the last constitution. That is the self-determination and self-governance issues. But thank you very much.
Congressman, if I may, I do have a follow-up based on what has been said. Thank you, Congressman, and thank you, colleagues. I think my question would be, would this be the vehicle to allow us to also become voting citizens and get us SSI like what CNMI is doing? Or is that going to be a separate process altogether? And something that Saipan has already have in their constitution, if we were to include something like legalized cockfighting in the Constitution and it is then ratified by Congress, could that be an avenue to federally legalize cockfighting on Guam, which was done since the 1500s? Something to that effect. Maybe you can help me on that.
We can. I think that the process is absolutely something that we can explore. All of those different kinds of options. We can make an effort to try and have those kind of things constitutionally provisioned, and see if those provisions will hold. We can also, in the Constitution, again, create a process for those kind of items to be reviewed and potentially addressed in less direct ways. So, for example, we could also try and write into our Constitution that federal laws pertaining to Guam may also be creating like an exemption process where we are able to exempt ourselves if Congress doesn't act. And so that creates like a way for these things to kind of move through the system, but it also isn't so direct that it's going to automatically raise a red flag. Like for example, if we were to do something on casino gambling, for example, and someone were to try and say that we're going to allow casino gambling on Guam through the Constitution, that of course would raise red flags that could potentially either halt the process or cause those things to be line itemed out. And then of course the window completely goes away. But if we are instead more creative in our drafting, and we draft it in a way that creates avenues for those kind of changes, but is not directly speaking towards those changes, then we can open the windows for those kind of changes to occur without trying to ram it through on the first go. Doing this constitutional process is going to give us that kind of an opportunity to kind of tighten the nuts and bolts on our own governance with respect to paying tax refunds, with respect to how we want to make sure that going out into debt is something that the community really wants us to be doing. But it's also, if craftily drafted, and if with these timelines we're able to provide the necessary reassurances to allow for that that kind of drafting to be successful, then we can also create windows for those kind of things to be addressed. So long story short, yes, we could do it that way, but I would advise that we use the opportunity to be a little more creative and open opportunities for that in ways that are less direct and would give us a chance to actually achieve what you're discussing.
Thank you, Congressman. I really appreciate this presentation today, and hope that we can continue to work together to move forward things that really concern Guam and where we should go and determine how our governance should. So, Sana Masi.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. I'm sorry, I know we had other senators with questions. If you could just go ahead and re-indicate. Senator, I'll go with Senator Moylan and then Senator San Augustine. Senator Moylan.
Thank you, Congressman. A very interesting conversation. It would be really advantageous if we did have our Constitution. And it's interesting to know that the last one that we looked at didn't raise any red flags, but now with this opportunity to update it with some good ideas that you were discussing, because if we're following the Constitution, there's no question. Sometimes there's questions when the body makes some laws that pass into laws, but then it's not followed. But it's different when you have your Constitution and you must follow your Constitution. So that I think this is interesting. And I know we need, I guess the first step, if we're moving forward with this, will be updating the current public law. So that's something we had to review to see where we need to move next. Maybe if you can just highlight again what needs to be done on that in the right direction to get that started. I know Matt kind of breezed through that really quickly, but if you can just highlight a few bullet points, I appreciate that.
Sure. So for your benefit and of course the legislative staff, we're going to be pulling up the source information. The Guam legislature adopted Public Law 13202. So that would be the reference public law. And the public law did a number of things. It established a constitutional convention, which began on May 4th, 1977. It set out qualifications and an election process for the convention delegates. So the delegates that basically sat in the room and drafted this constitution at the time, that public law created the process for how they are qualified and how they are to be elected. It set voter registration requirements and a deadline for February 28, 1977. That was just who would be able to participate on the electorate. I'm sure it was just an update. It set the number of delegates of each municipal district. It required the election of delegates on a subsequent month, on April 16th, 1977. It required the Speaker of the Legislature to convene an organizational meeting of the convention. It required the convention to draft a constitution consistent with Public Law 94-584, the public law that I'm referencing. It provides the convention may not last for more than 120 days. And so it gave a period certain so that there's no, perpetual constitution conversation. It's like, these are the people who can sit as delegates. This is how you're going to vote for them. This is how long they have to work to put something together. And it says in no event may the process continue beyond October 31st, 1977. And then it required the convention to submit a proposed constitution to the governor on or before December 31st, 1977. And then it required the proposed constitution, if approved by Congress, to be submitted to a referendum on August 4th, 1979. So it was a very procedural document that kind of created the framework. And then the Constitutional Convention framework that it created was what actually produced the Constitution. And then the Constitution that was produced, of course, was publicly informed and then transmitted pursuant to the federal law to start the clock on those timelines. Those timelines went through. No federal changes happened to what was transmitted. It came back to meet the final threshold of referendum, and then it failed on that final threshold. But that's basically the Guam public law that spelled out the process in 1977. Now, to be clear, that Guam public law is non-binding to anything you guys want to do today. So if you want to, of course, update something to make it more reflective of modern times, expand the means or the number of delegates, or create, certain super delegate positions, if you want to do that, really the local law is entirely on your crafting. But that was how it worked back then. That was the public law that created that process locally. And all we need to do to, once again, re-engage this would be to have a local law again passed to re-engage the process, because everything is still live and in good order.
Thank you, Congressman. Yeah, really to update that, that's 45 years old. We were really pretty young back then too. Not that we are not now. So that's all the questions I have on the Constitution, and I appreciate you introducing HR 6504. I'll do what I can also to support on that. That looks really good especially for small businesses. Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Congressman.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Senator San Agustin.
And thank you, Congressman San Nicolas, for inviting us to this briefing. Pretty much all the questions I was going to ask has been asked already, and I'm looking forward to finding ways to update the public law. We're not going to move forward until we do something, and I would invite my colleagues that we participate and we just get this going. And like you said, it's still alive unless we want to repeal it. Otherwise, we can't blame nobody but ourselves. 1977 is gone. I was in the police department then. 1977. I remember that, participating and voting on that. So I just say let's update it, the public law, and let's move on. Right, Congressman?
I apologize, Senator San Agustin. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, not a problem. Would you agree with me that we just need to update the public law, and then let's set the pace, and then let's move on. And if we need to take a look at what happened then let's take a look at it. But let's not make the excuse not to move on it. It's there, it's ready. I think it's prime. As you're working over there, trying to do what you need to do, we need to do what we need to do to help out so we can move along. And then we set the date for the plebiscite when we're going to decide what is our direction going to be. But let's get a constitution, then we start guiding ourselves in that direction. All right?
I very much agree with your perspective, Senator. I think that legislatura and taking advantage of this opportunity that still exists would also, I think, invigorate our people and have all of us having these even bigger conversations about what kind of governance and what kind of a governing environment do we want to have, something that would supersede an executive order, or something that would limit even legislative action. A constitution that we finally adopt and ratify can very distinctly draw lines on how we want things to be done around here, but it can also give us the opportunity to adjust those lines as we grow and we learn what kind of governance we want to have. And even if that were to change in the future, we can. The alternative is the status quo. We will have an organic act, and that's what we will continue to have. And if we want to pursue self-determination, which I think is something that we certainly should be doing, the Organic Act is going to continue to remain throughout the process of that pursuit. If we adopt a constitution, that then will be the governing document in place as we continue pursuing that. But being able also to adopt a constitution gives us the opportunity to really, at our own level, take ownership of that governance and decide how we want to draw those lines. Because right now, we barely can. Even a simple amendment to the Organic Act to try and clarify the hierarchies in our court system required an Organic Act amendment for us to do. And that required a whole bunch of federal processes that we really shouldn't need to invoke as we step into the shoes of self-governance, as we adopt our own governing document, and as we work on changing that and tweaking that and fine-tuning that. That's what I'm hoping can come out from this. If it's the will of the legislatura to not do that, we will just continue to operate under the Organic Act regime, and the challenges of that entails in terms of whatever frustrations may be happening today or have happened in the past or may happen in the future. A constitution will let us have a greater hand in self-governance. And that's granted, again, just to clarify, that's not the final step, but it's definitely, I would say, a next step. So thank you for that input, Senator San Agustin.
Yes, sir, Congressman. I look at it this way. As many of us have always talked about how we want rules and regulations to guide us and where we're going, well, then let's write the Constitution. Let's write the rules. Let's, exactly what you brought up, executive orders and whatever. We can guide ourselves and we can do the amendment as we need amended, but not make the reasons why we're not doing anything. And that's my position. I like to move forward. 1977, like I said, I was in the police force and still we haven't moved. I like to see it moving now in 2022 or in 2023, but let's just do something. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Congressman.
Thank you, Senator San Agustin. I have Senator Taitigui and then Senator Shelton.
Sidus Masi, Congressman, and thank you for this opportunity and keeping us abreast of HR 6504. I'm looking forward to reading this. I have to admit I hadn't had a chance to thoroughly read this HR 6504, as well as to do some research on the public law for Guam, as well as the public law 9450-584. And just going through, I just wanted to get an understanding as I start the research on this. The way I'm hearing you is that we create a constitution. Once this constitution has been created, and I'm hoping it gets a lot of input from the public, the community of Guam as well. It's not just something that this body or yourself as well as the governor just to come up with these ideas. I think it should be a collaborative effort with the community and involvement. So having these meetings throughout the villages, to get their input for this. But once it's created, it then goes to Congress. And you mentioned that Congress, if it doesn't act on it, it almost becomes adopted. And it automatically becomes, would I say law, or, that's what governs us. But in the event of that process, when it goes to Congress, Congress can Congress amend any of the parts of this constitution, amend it, strike out? And what about, like, for example, federal restrictions, like, for instance, the Jones Act, which Guam can definitely, have great strides toward lowering our cost of goods to this island, by eliminating the Jones Act. And that's one of the greatest things that we're held hostage to at that point. So in the event, so again, is that the process that would happen? And if Congress does amend any of that and then they adopt it, then it becomes, in fact, they can, if I'm not mistaken, they can even include and make amendments to the Constitution, not just strike out, let's say we want to put the Jones Act to allow, Guam to bypass that. But they can also incorporate into that constitution as well, and then adopt it. Is that what I'm hearing of the process?
So the Congress may approve, amend, or modify the proposed constitution.